The Life Divine by Aurobindo. Chapter 28. Supermind, Mind, and the Overmind Maya. There is a permanent, a truth, hidden by a truth where the sun unyokes his horses. The 10 hundreds of his rays came together. That one, I saw the most glorious of the forms of the gods. Rig Veda. The face of truth is hidden by a golden lid. That remove, O fostering sun, for the law of the truth, for sight. O sun, O soul seer, marshal thy rays, gather them together. Let me see of thee thy happiest form of all. That conscious being everywhere, he am I. Ishopanishad. The truth, the right, the vast. Atharva Veda. It became both truth and falsehood. It became the truth, even all this that is. Taittiriya Upanishad. One point remains to be cleared, which we have till now left in obscurity. The process of the lapse into the ignorance. For we have seen that nothing in the original nature of mind, life, or matter necessitates a fall from knowledge. It has been shown, indeed, that division of consciousness is the basis of the ignorance. A division of individual consciousness from the cosmic and the transcendent, of which yet it is an intimate part, in essence inseparable. A division of mind from the supramental truth of which it should be a subordinate action. Of life from the original force of which it is one energism. Of matter from the original existence of which it is one form of substance. But it has still to be made clear how this division came about in the indivisible. By what peculiar self-diminishing or self-effacing action of consciousness force in the being. For since all is a movement of that force, only by some such action, obscuring its own plenary light and power, can there have arisen the dynamic and effective phenomenon of the ignorance. But this problem can be left over to be treated in a more close examination of the dual phenomenon of knowledge-ignorance, which makes our consciousness a blend of light and darkness, a half-light between the full day of the supramental truth and the night of the material inconscience. All that is necessary to note at present is that it must be in its essential character an exclusive concentration on one movement and status of conscious being, which puts all the rest of consciousness and being behind and veils it from that one movement's now partial knowledge. Still, there is one aspect of this problem which must be immediately considered. It is the gulf created between mind as we know it and the supramental truth consciousness, of which we have found mind in its origin to be a subordinate process. For this gulf is considerable, and if there are no gradations between the two levels of consciousness, a transition from one to the other, either in the descending involution of spirit into matter, or the corresponding evolution in matter of the concealed grades leading back to the spirit, seems in the highest degree improbable, if not impossible. For mind as we know it is a power of the ignorance seeking for truth, groping with difficulty to find it, reaching only mental constructions and representations of it in word and idea, in mind formations, sense formations, as if bright or shadowy photographs or films of a distant reality were all that it could achieve. Supermind, on the contrary, is in actual and natural possession of the truth, and its formations are forms of the reality, not constructions, representations, or indicative figures. No doubt the evolving mind in us is hampered by its encasement in the obscurity of this life and body. And the original mind principle in the involutionary descent is a thing of greater power to which we have not fully reached, able to act with freedom in its own sphere or province, to build more revelatory constructions, more minutely inspired formations, more subtle and significant embodiments, in which the light of truth is present and palpable. But still, that too is not likely to be essentially different in its characteristic action, for it too is a movement into the ignorance, not a still unseparated portion of the truth consciousness. There must be somewhere in the descending and ascending scale of being an intermediate power and plane of consciousness. Perhaps something more than that, something with an original creative force through which the involutionary transition from mind in the knowledge to mind in the ignorance was effected, and through which again the evolutionary reverse transition becomes intelligible and possible. For the involutionary transition, this intervention is a logical imperative. For the evolutionary, it is a practical necessity. For in the evolution there are indeed radical transitions, from indeterminate energy to organized matter, from inanimate matter to life, from a subconscious or submental to a perceptive and feeling and acting life, from primitive animal mentality to conceptive reasoning mind, observing and governing life, and observing itself also, able to act as an independent entity, and even to seek consciously for self-transcendence. But these leaps, even when considerable, are to some extent prepared by slow gradations which make them conceivable and feasible. There can be no such immense hiatus as seems to exist between supramental truth consciousness and the mind in the ignorance. But if such intervening gradations exist, it is clear that they must be superconscient to human mind, which does not seem to have in its normal state any entry into these higher grades of being. Man is limited in his consciousness by mind, and even by a given range or scale of mind. What is below his mind, submental or mental but never to his scale, readily seems to him subconscious or not distinguishable from complete inconscience. What is above it is to him superconscious. He is almost inclined to regard it as void of awareness, a sort of luminous inconscience. Just as he is limited to a certain scale of sounds or of colors, and what is above or below that scale is to him inaudible and invisible, or at least indistinguishable, so is it with his scale of mental consciousness, confined at either extremity by an incapacity which marks his upper and his nether limit. He has no sufficient means of communication even with the animal, who is his mental congener, though not his equal. And he is even capable of denying mind or real consciousness to it, because its modes are other and narrower than those with which, in himself and his kind, he is familiar. He can observe submental being from outside, but cannot at all communicate with it or enter intimately into its nature. Equally, the superconscious is to him a closed book, which may well be filled only with empty pages. At first sight, then, it would appear as if he had no means of contact with these higher gradations of consciousness. If so, they cannot act as links or bridges, and his evolution must cease with his accomplished mental range, and cannot exceed it. Nature, in drawing these limits, has written finis to his upward endeavor. But when we look more closely, we perceive that this normality is deceptive, and that in fact there are several directions in which human mind reaches beyond itself, tends towards self-exceeding. These are precisely the necessary lines of contact, or veiled or half-veiled passages which connect it with higher grades of consciousness of the self-manifesting spirit. First, we have noted the place intuition occupies in the human means of knowledge. And intuition is in its very nature a projection of the characteristic action of these higher grades into the mind of ignorance. It is true that in human mind its action is largely hidden by the interventions of our normal intelligence. A pure intuition is a rare occurrence in our mental activity. For what we call by the name is usually a point of direct knowledge, which is immediately caught and coated over with mental stuff, so that it serves only as an invisible or a very tiny nucleus of a crystallization, which is in its mass intellectual or otherwise mental in character. Or else the flash of intuition is quickly replaced or intercepted before it has a chance of manifesting itself by a rapid, imitative mental movement, insight or quick perception, or some swift leaping process of thought, which owes its appearance to the stimulus of the coming intuition, but obstructs its entry, or covers it with a substituted mental suggestion, true or erroneous, but in either case not the authentic intuitive movement. Nevertheless, the fact of this intervention from above, the fact that behind all our original thinking or authentic perception of things, there is a veiled, a half-veiled, or a swift unveiled intuitive element, is enough to establish a connection between mind and what is above it. It opens a passage of communication and of entry into the superior spirit ranges. There is also the reaching out of mind to exceed the personal ego limitation, to see things in a certain impersonality and universality. Impersonality is the first character of cosmic self. Universality, non-limitation by the single or limiting point of view, is the character of cosmic perception and knowledge. This tendency is therefore a widening, however rudimentary, of these restricted mind areas towards cosmicity, towards a quality which is the very character of the higher mental planes, towards that superconscient cosmic mind which, we have suggested, must, in the nature of things, be the original mind action, of which ours is only a derivative and inferior process. Again, there is not an entire absence of penetration from above into our mental limits. The phenomena of genius are really the result of such a penetration. Veiled, no doubt, because the light of the superior consciousness not only acts within narrow limits, usually in a special field, without any regulated separate organization of its characteristic energies, often indeed quite fitfully, erratically, and with a supernormal or abnormal, irresponsible governance. But also, in entering the mind, it subdues and adapts itself to mind substance, so that it is only a modified or diminished dynamis that reaches us. Not all the original divine luminosity of what might be called the overhead consciousness beyond us. Still, the phenomena of inspiration, of revelatory vision, or of intuitive perception and intuitive discernment, surpassing our less illumined or less powerful normal mind action, are there, and their origin is unmistakable. Finally, there is the vast and multitudinous field of mystic and spiritual experience. And here the gates already lie wide open to the possibility of extending our consciousness beyond its present limits. Unless, indeed, by an obscurantism that refuses to inquire, or an attachment to our boundaries of mental normality, we shut them or turn away from the vistas they open before us. But in our present investigation, we cannot afford to neglect the possibilities which these domains of mankind's endeavor bring near to us, or the added knowledge of oneself and of the veiled reality which is their gift to human mind. The greater light which arms them with the right to act upon us and is the innate power of their existence. There are two successive movements of consciousness, difficult but well within our capacity, by which we can have access to the superior gradations of our conscious existence. There is first a movement inward, by which, instead of living in our surface mind, we break the wall between our external and our now subliminal self. This can be brought about by a gradual effort and discipline, or by a vehement transition, sometimes a forceful involuntary rupture. The latter by no means safe for the limited human mind, accustomed to live securely only within its normal limits. But in either way, safe or unsafe, the thing can be done. What we discover within this secret part of ourselves is an inner being, a soul, an inner mind, an inner life, an inner subtle physical entity, which is much larger in its potentialities, more plastic, more powerful, more capable of a manifold knowledge and dynamism than our surface mind, life, or body. Especially, it is capable of a direct communication with the universal forces, movements, objects of the cosmos. A direct feeling and opening to them, a direct action on them, and even a widening of itself beyond the limits of the personal mind, the personal life, the body, so that it feels itself more and more a universal being, no longer limited by the existing walls of our too narrow mental, vital, physical existence. This widening can extend itself to a complete entry into the consciousness of cosmic mind, into unity with the universal life, even into a oneness with universal matter. That, however, is still an identification either with a diminished cosmic truth or with the cosmic ignorance. But once this entry into the inner being is accomplished, the inner self is found to be capable of an opening, an ascent upwards into things beyond our present mental level. That is the second spiritual possibility in us. The first, most ordinary result is a discovery of a vast, static and silent self, which we feel to be our real or our basic existence, the foundation of all else that we are. There may be even an extinction, a nirvana, both of our active being and of the sense of self, into a reality that is indefinable and inexpressible. But also we can realize that this self is not only our own spiritual being, but the true self of all others. It presents itself then as the underlying truth of cosmic existence. It is possible to remain in a nirvana of all individuality, to stop at a static realization, or regarding the cosmic movement as a superficial play or illusion imposed on the silent self, to pass into some supreme, immobile and immutable status beyond the universe. But another, less negative line of supernormal experience also offers itself. For there takes place a large dynamic descent of light, knowledge, power, bliss, or other supernormal energies into our self of silence. And we can ascend too into higher regions of the spirit, where its immobile status is the foundation of those great and luminous energies. It is evident in either case that we have risen beyond the mind of ignorance into a spiritual state. But in the dynamic movement, the resultant greater action of consciousness force may present itself either simply as a pure spiritual dynamis, not otherwise determinate in its character, or it may reveal a spiritual mind range, where mind is no longer ignorant of the reality. Not yet a supermind level, but deriving from the supramental truth consciousness, and still luminous with something of its knowledge. It is in the latter alternative that we find the secret we are seeking, the means of the transition, the needed step towards a supramental transformation. For we perceive a graduality of ascent, a communication with a more and more deep and immense light and power from above, a scale of intensities which can be regarded as so many stairs in the ascension of mind, or in a descent into mind from that which is beyond it. We are aware of a sea-like downpour of masses of a spontaneous knowledge, which assumes the nature of thought, but has a different character from the process of thought to which we are accustomed. For there is nothing here of seeking, no trace of mental construction, no labor of speculation or difficult discovery. It is an automatic and spontaneous knowledge from a higher mind that seems to be in possession of truth and not in search of hidden and withheld realities. One observes that this thought is much more capable than the mind of including at once a mass of knowledge in a single view. It has a cosmic character, not the stamp of an individual thinking. Beyond this truth thought, we can distinguish a greater illumination, instinct with an increased power and intensity and driving force, a luminosity of the nature of truth sight, with thought formulation as a minor and dependent activity. If we accept the Vedic image of the Sun of Truth, an image which in this experience becomes a reality, we may compare the action of the higher mind to a composed and steady sunshine. The energy of the illumined mind beyond it to an outpouring of massive lightnings of flaming sun stuff. Still beyond can be met a yet greater power of the truth force, an intimate and exact truth vision, truth thought, truth sense, truth feeling, truth action, to which we can give in a special sense the name of intuition. For though we have applied that word for want of a better to any supra-intellectual direct way of knowing, yet what we actually know as intuition is only one special movement of self-existent knowledge. This new range is its origin. It imparts to our intuitions something of its own distinct character, and is very clearly an intermediary of a greater truth light, with which our mind cannot directly communicate. At the source of this intuition, we discover a superconscient cosmic mind in direct contact with the supramental truth consciousness, an original intensity determinant of all movements below it and all mental energies. Not mind as we know it, but an overmind that covers as with the wide wings of some creative oversoul this whole lower hemisphere of knowledge ignorance, links it with that greater truth consciousness, while yet at the same time, with its brilliant golden lid, it veils the face of the greater truth from our sight, intervening with its flood of infinite possibilities as at once an obstacle and a passage in our seeking of the spiritual law of our existence, its highest aim, its secret reality. This, then, is the occult link we were looking for. This is the power that at once connects and divides, ignorance, the supreme knowledge, and the cosmic ignorance. In its nature and law, the overmind is a delegate of the supermind consciousness. It's delegate to the ignorance. Or we might speak of it as a protective double, a screen of dissimilar similarity, through which supermind can act indirectly on an ignorance whose darkness could not bear or receive the direct impact of a supreme light. Even it is by the projection of this luminous overmind corona that the diffusion of a diminished light in the ignorance and the throwing of that contrary shadow which swallows up in itself all light, the inconscience, became at all possible. For supermind transmits to overmind all its realities, but leaves it to formulate them in a movement and according to an awareness of things, which is still a vision of truth, and yet at the same time a first parent of the ignorance. A line divides supermind and overmind, which permits a free transmission, allows the lower power to derive from the higher power all it holds or sees, but automatically compels a transitional change in the passage. The integrality of the supermind keeps always the essential truth of things, the total truth, and the truth of its individual self-determinations clearly knit together. It maintains in them an inseparable unity, and between them a close interpenetration and a free and full consciousness of each other. But in overmind, this integrality is no longer there. And yet, the overmind is well aware of the essential truth of things. It embraces the totality. It uses the individual self-determinations without being limited by them. But although it knows their oneness, can realize it in spiritual cognition, yet its dynamic movement, even while relying on that for its security, is not directly determined by it. Overmind energy proceeds through an illimitable capacity of separation and combination of the powers and aspects of the integral and indivisible, all-comprehending unity. It takes each aspect or power and gives to it an independent action, in which it acquires a full separate importance, and is able to work out, we might say, its own world of creation. Purusha and Prakriti, conscious soul and executive force of nature, are in the supramental harmony a two-aspected single truth, being and dynamis of the reality. There can be no disequilibrium or predominance of one over the other. In Overmind, we have the origin of the cleavage, the trenchant distinction made by the philosophy of the Sankhya's, in which they appear as two independent entities. Prakriti able to dominate Purusha and cloud its freedom and power, reducing it to a witness and recipient of her forms and actions. Purusha able to return to its separate existence and abide in a free self-sovereignty by rejection of her original overclouding material principle. So with the other aspects or powers of the divine reality. One and many, divine personality and divine impersonality, and the rest. Each is still an aspect and power of the one reality, but each is empowered to act as an independent entity in the whole. Arrive at the fullness of the possibilities of its separate expression, and develop the dynamic consequences of that separateness. At the same time, in Overmind, this separateness is still founded on the basis of an implicit underlying unity. All possibilities of combination and relation between the separated powers and aspects, all interchanges and mutualities of their energies are freely organized, and their actuality always possible. If we regard the powers of the reality as so many Godheads, we can say that the Overmind releases 1,000,000 Godheads into action, each empowered to create its own world, each world capable of relation, communication, and interplay with the others. There are in the Veda different formulations of the nature of the gods. It is said they are all one existence to which the sages give different names. Yet each god is worshipped as if he by himself is that existence, one who is all the other gods together or contains them in his being. And yet again, each is a separate deity, acting sometimes in unison with companion deities, sometimes separately, sometimes even in apparent opposition to other Godheads of the same existence. In the Supermind, all this would be held together as a harmonized play of the one existence. In the Overmind, each of these three conditions could be a separate action or basis of action, and have its own principle of development and consequences, and yet each keep the power to combine with the others in a more composite harmony. As with the one existence, so with its consciousness and force. The one consciousness is separated into many independent forms of consciousness and knowledge. Each follows out its own line of truth which it has to realize. The one total and many-sided real idea is split up into its many sides. Each becomes an independent idea force with the power to realize itself. The one consciousness force is liberated into its million forces, and each of these forces has the right to fulfill itself, or to assume, if needed, a hegemony and take up for its own utility the other forces. So, too, the delight of existence is loosed out into all manner of delights, and each can carry in itself its independent fullness or sovereign extreme. Overmind thus gives to the one existence consciousness bliss the character of a teeming of infinite possibilities, which can be developed into a multitude of worlds, or thrown together into one world, in which the endlessly variable outcome of their play is the determinant of the creation, of its process, its course, and its consequence. Since the consciousness force of the eternal existence is the universal creatrix, the nature of a given world will depend on whatever self-formulation of that consciousness expresses itself in that world. Equally, for each individual being, his seeing or representation to himself of the world he lives in will depend on the poise or make which that consciousness has assumed in him. Our human mental consciousness sees the world in sections cut by the reason and sense, and put together in a formation which is also sectional. The house it builds is planned to accommodate one or another generalized formulation of truth, but excludes the rest or admits some only as guests or dependents in the house. Overmind consciousness is global in its cognition and can hold any number of seemingly fundamental differences together in a reconciling vision. Thus, the mental reason sees person and the impersonal as opposites. It conceives an impersonal existence in which person and personality are fictions of the ignorance or temporary constructions. Or, on the contrary, it can see person as the primary reality and the impersonal as a mental abstraction, or only stuff or means of manifestation. To the overmind intelligence, these are separable powers of the one existence, which can pursue their independent self-affirmation and can also unite together their different modes of action, creating both in their independence and in their union, different states of consciousness and being, which can be all of them valid and all capable of coexistence. A purely impersonal existence and consciousness is true and possible, but also an entirely personal consciousness and existence. The impersonal divine, Nirguna Brahman, and the personal divine, Saguna Brahman, are here equal and coexistent aspects of the eternal. Impersonality can manifest with person subordinated to it as a mode of expression, but equally person can be the reality, with impersonality as a mode of its nature. Both aspects of manifestation face each other in the infinite variety of conscious existence. What to the mental reason are irreconcilable differences present themselves to the overmind intelligence as coexistent correlatives. What to the mental reason are contraries are to the overmind intelligence complementaries. Our mind sees that all things are born from matter or material energy, exist by it, go back into it. It concludes that matter is the eternal factor, the primary and ultimate reality, Brahman. Or it sees all as born of life force or mind, existing by life or by mind, going back into the universal life or mind. And it concludes that this world is a creation of the cosmic life force or of a cosmic mind or logos. Or again, it sees the world and all things as born of, existing by, and going back to the real idea or knowledge will of the Spirit, or to the Spirit itself, and it concludes on an idealistic or spiritual view of the universe. It can fix on any of these ways of seeing, but to its normal separative vision, each way excludes the others. Overmind consciousness perceives that each view is true of the action of the principle it erects. It can see that there is a material world formula, a vital world formula, a mental world formula, a spiritual world formula, and each can predominate in a world of its own, and at the same time all can combine in one world as its constituent powers. The self-formulation of conscious force on which our world is based, as an apparent inconscience that conceals in itself a supreme conscious existence and holds all the powers of being together in its inconscient secrecy. A world of universal matter realizing in itself life, mind, overmind, supermind, spirit, each of them in its turn taking up the others as means of its self-expression. Matter proving in the spiritual vision to have been always itself a manifestation of the spirit, is to the overmind view a normal and easily realizable creation. In its power of origination and in the process of its executive dynamis, overmind is an organizer of many potentialities of existence, each affirming its separate reality, but all capable of linking themselves together in many different but simultaneous ways. A magician craftsman empowered to weave the multicolored warp and woof of manifestation of a single entity in a complex universe. In this simultaneous development of multitudinous independent or combined powers or potentials, there is yet, or there is as yet, no chaos, no conflict, no fall from truth or knowledge. The overmind is a creator of truths, not of illusions or falsehoods. What is worked out in any given overmental energism or movement is the truth of the aspect, power, idea, force, delight, which is liberated into independent action. The truth of the consequences of its reality in that independence. There is no exclusiveness asserting each as the sole truth of being, or the others as inferior truths. Each God knows all the gods and their place in existence. Each idea admits all other ideas and their right to be. Each force concedes a place to all other forces and their truth and consequences. No delight of separate fulfilled existence or separate experience denies or condemns the delight of other existence or other experience. The overmind is a principle of cosmic truth, and a vast and endless Catholicity is its very spirit. Its energy is an all-dynamism as well as a principle of separate dynamisms. It is a sort of inferior supermind, although it is concerned predominantly not with absolutes, but with what might be called the dynamic potentials or pragmatic truths of reality, or with absolutes mainly for their power of generating pragmatic or creative values. Although, too, its comprehension of things is more global than integral, since its totality is built up of global wholes, or constituted by separate independent realities uniting or coalescing together. And although the essential unity is grasped by it and felt to be basic of things and pervasive in their manifestation, but no longer, as in the supermind, their intimate and ever-present secret, their dominating continent, the overt, constant builder of the harmonic whole of their activity and nature. If we would understand the difference of this global overmind consciousness from our separative and only imperfectly synthetic mental consciousness, we may come near to it if we compare the strictly mental with what would be an over-mental view of activities in our material universe. To the overmind, for example, all religions would be true as developments of the one eternal religion. All philosophies would be valid, each in its own field, as a statement of its own universe view from its own angle. All political theories with their practice would be the legitimate working out of an idea force, with its right to application and practical development in the play of the energies of nature. In our separative consciousness, imperfectly visited by glimpses of Catholicity and universality, these things exist as opposites. Each claims to be the truth and taxes the others with error and falsehood. Each feels impelled to refute or destroy the others in order that itself alone may be the truth and live. At best, each must claim to be superior, admit all others only as inferior truth expressions. An over-mental intelligence would refuse to entertain this conception or this drift to exclusiveness for a moment. It would allow all to live as necessary to the whole, or put each in its place in the whole, or assign to each its field of realization or of endeavor. This is because in us consciousness has come down completely into the divisions of the ignorance. Truth is no longer either an infinite or a cosmic whole with many possible formulations, but a rigid affirmation holding any other affirmation to be false because different from itself and entrenched in other limits. Our mental consciousness can indeed arrive in its cognition at a considerable approach towards a total comprehensiveness and Catholicity. But to organize that in action and life seems to be beyond its power. Evolutionary mind, manifest in individuals or collectivities, throws up a multiplicity of divergent viewpoints, divergent lines of action, and lets them work themselves out side by side or in collision or in a certain intermixture. It can make selective harmonies, but it cannot arrive at the harmonic control of a true totality. Cosmic mind must have, even in the evolutionary ignorance, like all totalities, such a harmony, if only of arranged accords and discords. There is too in it an underlying dynamism of oneness, but it carries the completeness of these things in its depths, perhaps in a supermind-overmind substratum, but does not impart it to individual mind in the evolution, does not bring it or has not yet brought it from the depths to the surface. An overmind world would be a world of harmony. The world of ignorance in which we live is a world of disharmony and struggle. And still, we can recognize at once in the overmind the original cosmic Maya. Not a Maya of ignorance, but a Maya of knowledge. Yet a power which has made the ignorance possible, even inevitable. For if each principle loosed into action must follow its independent line and carry out its complete consequences, the principle of separation must also be allowed its complete course and arrive at its absolute consequence. This is the inevitable descent, facilis descensus, which consciousness, once it admits the separative principle, follows till it enters by obscuring infinitesimal fragmentation to Jena into the material inconscience, the inconscient ocean of the Rig Veda. And if the one is born from that by its own greatness, it is still at first concealed by a fragmentary separative existence and consciousness which is ours, and in which we have to piece things together to arrive at a whole. In that slow and difficult emergence, a certain semblance of truth is given to the dictum of Heraclitus, that war is the father of all things. For each idea, force, separate consciousness, living being, by the very necessity of its ignorance, enters into collision with others, and tries to live and grow and fulfill itself by independent self-assertion, not by harmony with the rest of existence. Yet there is still the unknown underlying oneness, which compels us strive slowly towards some form of harmony, of interdependence, of concording of discords, of a difficult unity. But it is only by the evolution in us of the concealed, superconscient powers of cosmic truth, and of the reality in which they are one, that the harmony and unity we strive for can be dynamically realized in the very fibre of our being and all its self-expression, and not merely in imperfect attempts, incomplete constructions, ever-changing approximations. The higher ranges of spiritual mind have to open upon our being and consciousness. And also that which is beyond even spiritual mind must appear in us if we are to fulfill the divine possibility of our birth into cosmic existence. Overmind, in its descent, reaches a line which divides the cosmic truth from the cosmic ignorance. It is the line at which it becomes possible for consciousness force, emphasizing the separateness of each independent movement created by overmind, and hiding or darkening their unity, to divide mind by an exclusive concentration from the overmental source. There has already been a similar separation of overmind from its supramental source, but with a transparency in the veil which allows a conscious transmission and maintains a certain luminous kinship. But here the veil is opaque, and the transmission of the overmind motives to the mind is occult and obscure. Mind separated acts as if it were an independent principle, and each mental being, each basic mental idea, power, force, stands similarly on its separate self. If it communicates or combines with or contacts others, it is not with the Catholic universality of the overmind movement on a basis of underlying oneness, but as independent units joining to form a separate constructed whole. It is by this movement that we pass from the cosmic truth into the cosmic ignorance. The cosmic mind on this level, no doubt, comprehends its own unity, but it is not aware of its own source and foundation in the spirit, or can only comprehend it by the intelligence, not in any enduring experience. It acts in itself as if by its own right, and works out what it receives as material without direct communication with the source from which it receives it. Its units also act in ignorance of each other and of the cosmic whole, except for the knowledge that they can get by contact and communication. The basic sense of identity and the mutual penetration and understanding that comes from it are no longer there. all the actions of this mind energy proceed on the opposite basis of the ignorance and its divisions. And although they are the results of a certain conscious knowledge, it is a partial knowledge, not a true and integral self-knowledge, not a true and integral world knowledge. This character persists in life and in subtle matter, and reappears in the gross material universe, which arises from the final lapse into the inconscience. Yet, as in our subliminal or inner mind, so in this mind also a larger power of communication and mutuality still remains, a freer play of mentality and sense than human mind possesses, and the ignorance is not complete. A conscious harmony, an interdependent organization of right relations is more possible. Mind is not yet perturbed by blind life forces or obscured by irresponsive matter. It is a plane of ignorance, but not yet of falsehood or error. Or at least the lapse into falsehood and error is not yet inevitable. This ignorance is limitative, but not necessarily falsificative. There is limitation of knowledge, an organization of partial truths, but not a denial or opposite of truth or knowledge. This character of an organization of partial truths on a basis of separative knowledge persists in life and subtle matter. For the exclusive concentration of consciousness force, which puts them into separative action, does not entirely sever or veil mind from life, or mind and life from matter. The complete separation can take place only when the stage of inconscience has been reached, and our world of manifold ignorance arises out of that tenebrous matrix. These other still conscient stages of the involution are indeed organizations of conscious force in which each lives from his own center, follows out his own possibilities, and the predominant principle itself, whether mind, life, or matter, works out things on its own independent basis. But what is worked out are truths of itself, not illusions or a tangle of truth and falsehood, knowledge and ignorance. But when, by an exclusive concentration on force and form. Consciousness force seems phenomenally to separate consciousness from force, or when it absorbs consciousness in a blind sleep, lost in form and force. Then consciousness has to struggle back to itself by a fragmentary evolution which necessitates error and makes falsehood inevitable. Nevertheless, these things too are not illusions that have sprung out of an original non-existence. They are, we might say, the unavoidable truths of a world born out of inconscience. For the ignorance is still, in reality, a knowledge seeking for itself behind the original mask of inconscience. It misses and finds. Its results, natural and even inevitable on their own line, are the true consequence of the lapse. In a way, even the right working of the recovery from the lapse. Existence plunging into an apparent non-existence. Consciousness into an apparent inconscience. Delight of existence into a vast cosmic insensibility are the first result of the fall. And in the return from it, by a struggling, fragmentary experience, the rendering of consciousness into the dual terms of truth and falsehood, knowledge and error, of existence into the dual terms of life and death, of delight of existence into the dual terms of pain and pleasure, are the necessary process of the labor of self-discovery. A pure experience of truth, knowledge, delight, imperishable existence would here be itself a contradiction of the truth of things. It could only be otherwise if all beings in the evolution were quiescently responsive to the psychic element within them and to the supermind underlying nature's operations. But here there comes in the overmind law of each force working out its own possibilities. The natural possibilities of a world in which an original inconscience and a division of consciousness are the main principle would be the emergence of forces of darkness, impelled to maintain the ignorance by which they live. An ignorant struggle to know, originative of falsehood and error. An ignorant struggle to live, engendering wrong and evil. An egoistic struggle to enjoy, parent of fragmentary joys and pains and sufferings. These are therefore the inevitable first imprinted characters, though not the sole possibilities of our evolutionary existence. Still, because the non-existence is a concealed existence, the inconscience a concealed consciousness, the insensibility a masked and dormant ananda, these secret realities must emerge. The hidden overmind and supermind too must in the end fulfill themselves in this apparently opposite organization from a dark infinite. Two things render that culmination more facile than it would otherwise be. Overmind, in the descent towards material creation, has originated modifications of itself. Intuition, especially, with its penetrative lightning flashes of truth, lighting up local points and stretches of country in our consciousness, which can bring the concealed truth of things nearer to our comprehension. And by opening ourselves more widely, first in the inner being, and then as a result in the outer surface self also, to the messages of these higher ranges of consciousness, by growing into them, we can become ourselves also intuitive and over-mental beings, not limited by the intellect and sense, but capable of a more universal comprehension and a direct touch of truth in its very self and body. In fact, flashes of enlightenment from these higher ranges already come to us. But this intervention is mostly fragmentary, casual, or partial. We have still to begin to enlarge ourselves into their likeness and organize in us the greater truth activities of which we are potentially capable. But secondly, overmind, intuition, even supermind, not only must be, as we have seen, principles inherent and involved in the inconscience from which we arise in the evolution and inevitably destined to evolve, but are secretly present, occult actively with flashes of intuitive emergence in the cosmic activity of mind, life, and matter. It is true that their action is concealed, and even when they emerge, it is modified by the medium, material, vital, mental, in which they work, and not easily recognizable. Supermind cannot manifest itself as the creator power in the universe from the beginning. For if it did, the ignorance and inconscience would be impossible, or else the slow evolution necessary would change into a rapid transformation scene. Yet, at every step of the material energy, we can see the stamp of inevitability given by a supramental creator. In all the development of life and mind, the play of the lines of possibility and their combination, which is the stamp of Overmind intervention. As life and mind have been released in matter, so too must in their time these greater powers of the concealed Godhead emerge from the involution, and their supreme light descend into us from above. A divine life in the manifestation is then not only possible as the high result and ransom of our present life in the ignorance, but if these things are as we have seen them, it is the inevitable outcome and consummation of nature's evolutionary endeavor.